A quiet Sunday morning breakfast turned into $1 million mistake the moment a prejudiced rookie decided he was above the law. When a black man sitting calmly in a suburban diner with a little blonde girl was unlawfully slapped in irons, the arresting officer thought he was making a hero's bust. He smirked, confident he had saved a child. He didn't know the man he had just humiliated was one of the most powerful legal figures in the state. What followed wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling of an entire police department's corruption. This is the story of how a $1.1 million piece of karma was served cold. The bell above the heavy glass door of the Silver Spoon Diner chimed a cheerful sound that completely betrayed the heavy atmosphere inside. Marcus Caldwell stepped out of the crisp autumn air and into the warmth of the restaurant, holding the small, pale hand of his 7-year-old daughter, Brielle. Marcus was a man who commanded respect without ever asking for it. At 52, Silver was beginning to salt his close-cropped dark hair, and the sharp tailoring of his casual weekend tweed jacket spoke of a man who appreciated order and precision. Beside him, Brielle was a whirlwind of energy, with her bright blonde pigtails bouncing and her sky-blue eyes scanning the room for the best booth. She was the absolute picture of carefree innocence. Brielle was Marcus's legally adopted daughter, the biological child of his late wife's estranged best friend, who had passed away unexpectedly years prior. Since that day, Marcus and Brielle had been an inseparable unit, bound by profound tragedy and an even more profound love. "Can we get the corner booth, Dad?" Brielle tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward a red vinyl booth bathed in the morning sunlight. "Lead the way, sweetheart." Marcus smiled, his deep voice carrying a natural warmth as they walked down the central aisle. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of Sunday morning chatter began to subtly drop in volume. It wasn't an immediate silence, but a gradual, noticeable dampening. Marcus, whose life's work required him to read the room and analyze human behavior, noticed it instantly. The sideways glances, the lowered voices behind laminated menus. At the front counter, Lena Forrester, the morning shift manager, narrowed her eyes. Lena had worked at the Silver Spoon for years, a tenure that, in her mind, made her the undisputed gatekeeper of the community. She wiped down the counter with a rag, her gaze fixed entirely on the imposing black man and the little white girl settling into booth number 4. "Did you see that?" Lena muttered to the waitress beside her, a young college student named Sarah. Sarah blinked, confused. "See what? The guy with his kid?" "That's not his kid," Lena whispered sharply, her jaw tight. "Look at them. You think they look related? He's probably 3 times her age, and she's... well, look at her." "Families look all kinds of ways, Lena. I'll go get them some water." Sarah sighed, grabbing a pitcher, but Lena's mind was already racing down a dark, paranoid track. She watched as Marcus handed Brielle a menu, smiling as the little girl dramatically pretended to read the complicated breakfast specials. Lena's prejudice was an old, ugly thing, masked usually by Southern hospitality, but today it flared with self-righteous alarm. She observed Marcus's calm demeanor, mistaking his quiet confidence for the calculated coolness of a criminal. She saw Brielle laughing, but in Lena's twisted perception, the child seemed overly eager to please, perhaps out of fear. "Sarah, wait." Lena intercepted the waitress. "I'll take their table. I want to get a closer look at this." Lena approached the table, her smile tight and artificial. "Morning. What can I get for you two?" "Good morning," Marcus replied politely, placing his menu down. "We'll start with 2 orange juices, please, and my daughter would like to order her own food today." Marcus looked at Brielle encouragingly. Brielle sat up straight, clearing her throat with adorable importance. "I would like the chocolate chip pancakes, please, with extra whipped cream and bacon. Crispy." Lena stared at Brielle, ignoring Marcus entirely. "Are you okay, sweetie? Are you safe?" The question hung in the air, heavy and jarring. Brielle, confused, looked at Marcus, her smile faltering. I'm hungry." Marcus's eyes hardened fractionally, though his voice remained perfectly measured. "She is perfectly fine, ma'am. Just the pancakes, the bacon, and I'll have the Denver omelet." "I was talking to the child," Lena snapped back, the artificial smile vanishing. "And I am her father answering on her behalf," Marcus said, his tone dropping an octave, carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "We've placed our order." Lena flushed a deep, angry red. She spun on her heel and marched back to the counter, her mind completely made up. The man was arrogant, defensive, and clearly up to no good. In her mind, she wasn't acting on racism. She was acting on instinct. She was a hero waiting in the wings. She picked up the phone beside the register and dialed the local precinct. "Dispatch received the call that morning. Oak Creek Police. What is your emergency?" "Yes, I need an officer down at the Silver Spoon Diner on Elm Street," Lena whispered frantically into the receiver, turning her back to the dining room so Marcus wouldn't see her. "There's a situation here. A suspicious man." "Can you describe the man and the situation, ma'am?" "He's a tall black man, 50s maybe. He came in here dragging a little blonde girl. She can't be more than 6 or 7. They don't look right. He's acting extremely aggressive and defensive when I tried to speak to the child to make sure she was safe." The dispatcher, trained to take all reports of child endangerment seriously, clicked away on her keyboard. "Did you witness any physical altercation? Is the child crying?" "No, but she looks scared," Lena lied, the adrenaline of her own fabricated drama fueling her. "He wouldn't let her speak to me. I think she might have been kidnapped. You need to get someone here right now before he leaves with her." Miles away, Officer Derek Harlan was cruising down Maple Avenue in his patrol unit. Harlan was in his 20s, a rookie with only a couple of years on the force, but he carried himself with the swagger of a veteran. He was known among his peers for being aggressive on patrol, quick to escalate, and utterly convinced of his own infallible intuition. He listened to the radio dispatch crackle to life. "Unit 4, suspicious circumstance, possible child endangerment at the Silver Spoon. White female caller reports a black male, approximately 50s, acting aggressively, accompanied by a white female child, approximately 7 years old. Caller suspects kidnapping." Harlan grabbed his radio. "Unit 4, copy. I'm minutes out." Harlan flipped on his lights, though he spared the siren. His heart rate spiked. This was it. A real case, not a noise complaint or a traffic ticket. Kidnapping. As he sped toward the diner, he didn't pause to consider the lack of an Amber Alert or the absurdity of a kidnapper taking his victim out for chocolate chip pancakes in a crowded public restaurant on a Sunday morning. He had a suspect description, and his own ingrained prejudices filled in the rest of the blanks. When Harlan's cruiser pulled aggressively into the diner's parking lot, the flashing blue and red lights painted the front windows of the restaurant. Inside, patrons turned their heads. Marcus, halfway through his cup of black coffee, saw the lights reflect in the window. A sinking feeling pulled in his stomach. He had spent his entire life navigating the world carefully, but he knew the reality of his skin color in certain spaces. He glanced at Brielle, who was happily using a bacon strip to scoop up whipped cream. Officer Harlan burst through the doors, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt near his sidearm. He bypassed the host stand. Lena pointed a shaking finger directly at booth number 4. Harlan approached the table like a predator, zeroing in. His posture was rigid, his expression hostile. "Morning," Harlan said, the words sounding more like a threat than a greeting. Marcus slowly placed his coffee mug on the table. He kept his hands visible, resting them flat on either side of his plate. "Officer, how can I help you?" "I need to see some identification," Harlan demanded loudly. The diner fell deathly silent. Every eye was on the corner booth. Brielle stopped chewing, her eyes darting between the large police officer and her father. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Keep eating," Marcus said softly, never breaking eye contact with the officer. "Officer, am I suspected of committing a crime?" Harlan bristled. He hated when civilians pushed back. "I received a call about a suspicious individual and a potential child endangerment situation. Now, hand over your ID." "I understand you received a call. Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of panic or anger. It was a voice used to command in courtrooms, not pleading for basic dignity in a diner. However, sitting and eating breakfast is not a crime. You have no reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Therefore, under state law, I am not required to present identification. Harlan's face turned scarlet. In his mind, an innocent man would just hand over the license. This legal jargon was a deflection, a sign of guilt. Are you refusing a lawful order? I am declining an unlawful request, Marcus corrected smoothly. This child is my daughter. We are eating breakfast. I suggest you speak to the manager who called you and explain the waste of municipal resources. Step outside now, Harlan barked, stepping closer, his hand gripping his handcuffs. Lyra dropped her fork. Tears welled up in her eyes. Dad, I'm scared. Marcus's calm exterior almost cracked at the sound of his daughter's distress. The protective instinct surged, but Marcus's brilliant legal mind calculated the variables in a microsecond. If he argued, if he stood up too quickly, this volatile, poorly trained officer might use force. If he reached into his jacket to produce his wallet to prove who he was, he could be shot. The absolute priority was Brielle's physical safety and shielding her from violence. It's okay, Brielle, Marcus said gently. He looked at Harlan. Officer, my daughter is terrified. I will comply with your physical demands under protest to prevent you from escalating this in front of a child. But let the record show I am not resisting, and you are acting without probable cause. Get up, Harlan ordered, completely ignoring Marcus's words. Marcus slowly slid out of the booth. He stood up straight, towering over Officer Harlan by a good few inches. He didn't puff out his chest or make any sudden movements, but the sheer presence of the man made Harlan take a half step back. To compensate for his momentary intimidation, Harlan grabbed Marcus's left arm, roughly twisting it behind his back. Hey! A voice shouted from the back of the diner. It was an older man in a baseball cap. Leave him alone. He wasn't doing anything. Stay back, sir! Police business! Harlan shouted over his shoulder. Marcus felt the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists. Click, click, click. The sound was deafening in the quiet diner. He was being arrested, publicly humiliated, treated like a violent felon in the middle of a Sunday breakfast. The profound injustice burned in his chest, but his face remained a mask of pure stone. He had spent decades in the justice system. He knew that the battle was never won on the street. It was won in the courtroom. Dad, Brielle screamed, scrambling out of the booth, tears streaming down her face. She ran toward Marcus and hugged his leg, crying hysterically. Marcus's heart broke. Brielle, look at me, he said, twisting his neck to look down at her, ignoring the pain in his shoulders. It's a mistake. Everything is going to be okay. Remember what we talked about. I need you to be brave. Get the kid away from him, Harlan snapped at Lena, who was standing nearby, looking slightly pale as the reality of her phone call manifested into a crying child and a man in chains. Sarah, the young waitress, pushed past Lena and knelt beside Brielle, wrapping her arms around the little girl. I've got her, sir, Sarah said to Marcus, her voice shaking with anger directed at the officer. I'll stay right here with her. Do you have someone I can call? My sister, Marcus said calmly, reciting a phone number from memory. Tell her Marcus needs her at the diner immediately to pick up Brielle. Thank you, Sarah. You don't get to make arrangements, Harlan sneered, shoving Marcus toward the door. Marcus stopped walking. He dug his heels into the linoleum floor. Harlan pushed, but Marcus was solidly planted. He turned his head and looked dead into Officer Harlan's eyes. The absolute chilling certainty in Marcus's gaze made the rookie's stomach drop for a split second. You lay one finger on my daughter, you hand her over to state custody, and I promise you, by the end of the day, you won't just be unemployed. You will be unemployable, Marcus said. The words weren't yelled. They were delivered with the terrifying clarity of a guaranteed promise. My sister will be here in minutes. My daughter stays with this waitress until then. Now, let's go. Marcus resumed walking, forcing Harlan to follow him rather than lead him. They stepped out into the crisp air. Several people were now outside, cell phones raised, recording the incident. Marcus held his head high as he was walked to the cruiser. He was pushed into the back of the police car, the hard plastic seat uncomfortable against his cuffed wrists. The door slammed shut, trapping him in the claustrophobic, cage-like backseat. He smelled stale sweat and the harsh chemical scent of industrial cleaner. Harlan got into the driver's seat, practically vibrating with the adrenaline of the arrest. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4. I have one male suspect in custody. Refusal to identify, resisting arrest, and suspicion of kidnapping. Transporting to central lockup." Marcus sat in silence as the cruiser pulled out of the parking lot. He watched the diner fade from view, his mind solely focused on his daughter's tears. "You're in a lot of trouble, buddy," Harlan said, looking at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "You should have known the law before you swore an oath to uphold it," Marcus replied quietly. "Oh, we got a jailhouse lawyer back there," Harlan chuckled, confident in his authority. "Let me tell you how this works. We're going to get to the station. You're going to get printed. We're going to run your face, and we're going to find out exactly who you stole that little girl from." Marcus leaned back against the hard plastic, closing his eyes. He didn't feel rage anymore. He felt a cold, calculating focus. Officer Harlan didn't know it, and the Oak Creek Police Department didn't know it yet. But they had just placed the Honorable Judge Marcus J. Caldwell of the State Superior Court in handcuffs, and Marcus was about to teach them a devastating million-dollar lesson about the law. The drive to the Oak Creek Police Department took minutes, but for Marcus Caldwell sitting in the suffocating plastic-lined back seat of Unit 4, it felt like an eternity. His wrists throbbed where the steel cuffs bit into his skin, a stark physical reminder of the sheer vulnerability of his position. Yet beneath the very real fear for his daughter's immediate trauma, a cold, methodical anger was calcifying in his chest. Marcus wasn't just a man wronged. He was a legal scholar who had spent decades dismantling bad arrests from the bench. Officer Derek Harlan had no idea he had just strapped a constitutional law expert into the back of his cruiser. The cruiser jerked to a halt in the precinct's sally port. The heavy metal garage doors rolled down, sealing them inside the concrete bunker. Harlan yanked Marcus's door open, grabbing him by the bicep with unnecessary force. "Out!" Marcus stepped out, his posture impeccably straight, despite his arms being pinned behind him. He walked through the heavy steel doors and into the harsh, buzzing fluorescent light of the precinct's booking area. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Behind the elevated booking desk sat Sergeant William Miller, a veteran counting down the days to his pension. Miller was nursing a lukewarm coffee, his eyes glued to a computer monitor. He barely looked up as Harlan paraded his captive to the counter. "What do we have, Harlan?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly and devoid of interest. "Sunday morning domestic. Suspicious person. Resisting arrest. Failure to identify, and possible child abduction." Harlan rattled off proudly, chest puffed out. "Got a call from the manager at the Silver Spoon. He was with a little white girl. Wouldn't say who he was, refused to show ID, got combative." Miller finally looked up. His eyes dragged over Marcus's tailored tweed jacket, his polished leather loafers, and his calm, entirely uncombative demeanor. Miller had been on the job a long time. He knew what a violent felon looked like, and he knew what an angry civilian looked like. The man standing before him looked like neither. He looked like a man quietly memorizing every detail of the room. "You didn't run him in the field?" Miller asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into his voice. "He refused to hand over his wallet. Sarge said I didn't have probable cause," Harlan scoffed, leaning against the counter. "Thought he was a hotshot lawyer or something." Marcus stood perfectly still. "Sergeant." Marcus spoke, his voice resonating with an unshakable, booming authority that echoed off the cinderblock walls. "For the record, and for the audio recording I see running in the corner of this room, I was detained and arrested without reasonable, articulable suspicion in direct violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. I am requesting my phone call, and I will not be speaking another word to this officer." Miller frowned. The man didn't sound panicked. He sounded like he was giving a lecture. "Empty your pockets, sir. Put everything on the counter." Harlan reached out to pat Marcus down, but Marcus shifted his weight slightly. "My hands are cuffed behind my back, Officer Harlan. If you want my belongings, you will have to retrieve them yourself. My wallet is in my left breast pocket." Harlan sneered, roughly reaching into Marcus's jacket and pulling out a slim, expensive-looking leather wallet. He tossed it onto the metal counter. "Let's see who you really are." Miller flipped the wallet open. The first thing he saw wasn't a standard driver's license. It was a heavy gold-enameled badge pinned to the leather, sitting directly above a state identification card. Miller's breath hitched in his throat. He stopped chewing his gum. He leaned in closer, his tired eyes suddenly wide and terrified. He looked at the badge, then at the ID, and then slowly, agonizingly, up at the man in handcuffs. State Superior Court, the Honorable Marcus J. Caldwell. Miller had testified in Judge Caldwell's courtroom years ago. Caldwell was legendary in the state for his razor-sharp intellect, his zero-tolerance policy for police perjury, and his absolute unwavering demand for constitutional adherence. He was the man who signed their warrants. He was the man who could end a police chief's career with a single ruling. And Harlan had just dragged him in like a vagrant. "Harlan," Miller croaked, his voice suddenly sounding very small. All the color had drained from the veteran sergeant's face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. "Step back from the suspect." "What? Why?" Harlan demanded, confused and annoyed, as Miller practically shoved him out of the way. "Judge Caldwell," Miller stammered, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the tiny key to unlock the handcuffs. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry. There's been a massive mistake." The heavy steel cuffs fell away with a clank onto the linoleum floor. Marcus slowly brought his arms forward. He didn't rub his wrists. He didn't sigh in relief. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, buttoned his tweed jacket, and looked at Sergeant Miller with eyes that could freeze boiling water. "A mistake, Sergeant Miller, is a mathematical error on a parking ticket," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "What happened today was a deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Harlan stood frozen, his brain struggling to process the words Judge Caldwell. The smug superiority melted off his face, replaced by a sickening wave of dread. "Wait, he's a judge? But the diner, the little girl?" "That little girl, Officer Harlan, is my legally adopted daughter." Marcus turned his gaze to the rookie. "And you assaulted her father in front of her, traumatized her, and threatened to throw her into the foster care system because a racist diner manager made a phone call and you were too poorly trained to verify a single fact before applying physical force." The booking room descended into a suffocating silence. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. "Judge Caldwell, please," Miller pleaded, grabbing a clean chair and pushing it toward Marcus. "Please sit down. Can I get you some water? I'm calling Chief Hughes right now. We can clear this up. Harlan is a rookie. He's an idiot, but we can fix this." "I will not sit down, Sergeant, and you cannot fix false imprisonment," Marcus replied coldly. "I want my phone now." Miller practically lunged across the desk to retrieve Marcus's cell phone from the plastic property bin, handing it over as if it were a live grenade. Marcus dialed a number. He didn't call his wife. He didn't have one anymore. He didn't call his sister, Beatrice, who was already en route to the diner to collect Brielle. He called Isaiah Dobbs, the most feared civil rights attorney on the Eastern Seaboard, and Marcus's former law school roommate. "Isaiah, it's Marcus," he said into the phone, his eyes locked on Harlan, who was now visibly sweating. "I need you down at the Oak Creek Police Precinct. Yes, right now. No, I am not presiding. I am currently the victim of an unlawful arrest, false imprisonment, and battery by a police officer. Bring a stenographer and the drafted paperwork for a Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit. I'll wait." Marcus hung up. He looked at Miller. "Call your chief." Tell him to bring his checkbook and the city's risk management attorneys, because I am not leaving this building until they understand the exact price of this department's incompetence." Within minutes, the precinct transformed from a sleepy Sunday morning shift into a chaotic war room. Chief Warren Maddox, a heavy-set man who had been enjoying a round of golf, burst through the back doors wearing a polo shirt and spikes, panting heavily. "Judge Caldwell, my God, Marcus, I just heard." Chief Maddox rushed forward, extending a hand that was visibly shaking. Marcus did not take the hand. He simply stared at it until Maddox awkwardly pulled it back. "Warren," Marcus said evenly, "your officer assaulted me illegally, detained me, and threatened my 7-year-old daughter. I want you to explain to me how your department interprets the legal standard for a Terry stop." Maddox swallowed hard. "Marcus, please. Harlan acted outside of protocol. He's going to be disciplined severely, suspended pending investigation. We are deeply, deeply sorry. We can handle this internally. You know how this looks for the city." "I don't care how it looks for the city, Warren. I care how it looked to my daughter when an armed man dragged her father away." Marcus's voice finally betrayed a flicker of raw emotion, making it all the more terrifying. "You are not going to handle this internally. You are not going to give this officer a paid vacation while you sweep it under the rug." Just then, the heavy double doors of the precinct swung open. Isaiah Dobbs walked in. He was a shark of a man clad in a sharp charcoal suit despite the weekend, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Behind him was a court reporter carrying her machine. "Marcus," Dobbs said, assessing the room in seconds flat. He looked at Chief Maddox, then at the terrified rookie Harlan. A predatory smile touched Dobbs's lips. "Gentlemen, I hope you have your municipal insurance policy handy." "Isaiah, this is a misunderstanding," Chief Maddox protested, sweating profusely now. "We released the judge immediately upon realizing the error." "Oh, you don't get a medal for taking the cuffs off a man you had no right to put them on," Dobbs countered sharply, opening his briefcase on the booking counter. "Chief Maddox, Officer Harlan, Sergeant Miller, I am officially notifying you of our intent to file a civil lawsuit against the Oak Creek Police Department, the City of Oak Creek, and Officer Derek Harlan individually." Dobbs pulled out a pristine legal pad. "We will be citing violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, false imprisonment, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress on a minor, and negligent hiring and training practices by the city." "Marcus, be reasonable," Maddox pleaded. "A lawsuit of this magnitude, it will bankrupt our operational budget for the year." "Then perhaps," Marcus said, leaning slightly forward, his presence dominating the entire room, "you should have spent that budget training your officers not to weaponize their badges on behalf of racist civilians. I told your officer he was acting without probable cause. He chose to ignore the law. Now the law is going to bankrupt you." Meanwhile, back at the Silver Spoon, Beatrice Caldwell had arrived. She found Brielle sitting in a booth clutching Sarah the waitress, her small face stained with tears. Lena Forrester, the manager who had started the entire nightmare, was standing nervously by the register, realizing the gravity of what she had unleashed. Beatrice, a formidable woman with Marcus's sharp features and uncompromising posture, scooped her niece into her arms. "I've got you, Brielle Bug. Auntie B is here." She turned to Lena. "Did you call the police on my brother?" Lena stammered. I was just concerned for the child. They didn't look... he was acting suspicious." "He was ordering pancakes, you ignorant woman," Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "My brother is a state superior court judge. You didn't see a suspicious man. You saw a black man with a white child, and your bigotry did the rest. Expect to hear from our lawyers regarding your employment here." The trap was fully set. The Oak Creek Police Department was caught in a vice grip of their own making, and the city's lawyers were about to receive the most expensive wake-up call of their careers. The $1.1 million reckoning had officially begun. Months had passed since the Sunday morning that shattered the quiet illusion of Oak Creek. The pristine, glass-walled conference room on the floor of Sterling and Associates in downtown Chicago felt light years away from the sticky vinyl booths of the Silver Spoon Diner. But the tension was infinitely thicker. This was the discovery phase of the civil rights lawsuit, Caldwell versus City of Oak Creek et al. And Isaiah Dobbs was meticulously, methodically dismantling the defense. Across the sprawling mahogany table sat Officer Derek Harlan. He was no longer the arrogant, puffed-up rookie who had aggressively slapped cuffs on a civilian. Stripped of his uniform and wearing an ill-fitting gray suit, Harlan looked pale, exhausted, and terrified. Next to him sat the city's lead defense attorney, a perpetually sweating man named Harrison Cobb, who knew he was fighting a completely unwinnable battle. Judge Marcus Caldwell sat silently at the end of the table. He wore a navy pinstripe suit, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He hadn't said a single word since the deposition began hours ago. His mere presence was a psychological weight that was actively crushing Harlan. "Officer Harlan," Isaiah Dobbs said, pacing slowly in front of the windows overlooking the city skyline. "Let's return to the moment you entered the diner. You testified earlier that you felt an immediate threat. Could you articulate for the record what specific physical actions Marcus Caldwell took that constituted a threat to your safety?" Harlan swallowed hard, glancing at Cobb. He refused to comply. He was argumentative." "Argumentative?" Dobbs repeated softly, tasting the word. "Is asserting one's Fourth Amendment rights a crime in the state of Illinois, Officer Harlan?" "No," Harlan mumbled. "You'll need to speak up for the court reporter," Dobbs said sharply. "No," Harlan said louder, his voice cracking slightly. So he was not committing a crime by refusing to identify himself without reasonable suspicion. Let's look at the catalyst. Dobbs walked over to the table and tapped a flat-screen monitor. Exhibit C, the 911 call from Lena Forrester. Let's listen together, shall we? Dobbs hit play. Lena's frantic, whispering voice filled the room. "He's a tall black man dragging a little blonde girl. They don't look right." Dobbs paused the audio. "Officer Harlan, as a sworn law enforcement officer trained at the Municipal Academy, does a black man sitting with a white child constitute reasonable suspicion of a crime?" "No," Harlan whispered. "Yet, when you arrived, you bypassed the caller. You bypassed any preliminary investigation. You walked straight to the table and demanded identification from a man eating a Denver omelet. Why?" "I was relying on the dispatch information. The caller said she suspected kidnapping," Harlan defended, grasping at straws. "Ah, yes, the kidnapping." Dobbs smiled, a chilling expression devoid of any real warmth. He tapped the screen again. "Exhibit F, your own body camera footage. Let's play the moment right after you secured my client in the back of your cruiser." The screen flickered to life. The audio was scratchy, but clear. Harlan's voice echoed in the conference room. "You're in a lot of trouble, buddy. We're going to run your face, and we're going to find out exactly who you stole that little girl from." Dobbs froze the frame on Harlan's smug face in the rearview mirror. He leaned across the table, his eyes locked onto the former rookie. "Stole," Dobbs emphasized, "not who you are, not what your relationship is. You had already tried, convicted, and sentenced him in your own mind. You didn't investigate a crime, Officer Harlan. You executed a prejudice. And because of your profound ignorance, you traumatized a 7-year-old girl and falsely imprisoned a sitting judge of the state superior court." Harrison Cobb held up a hand. "Dobbs, my client has admitted to a procedural error." "A procedural error is forgetting a signature on a citation, Harrison," Dobbs barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "This was a blatant, willful violation of civil rights under color of law, and we are not stopping with Officer Harlan." Dobbs pulled out a thick manila folder. "We've also subpoenaed the corporate records of the Silver Spoon Diner and the personal communications of Lena Forrester. Would you like to know what we found?" Cobb looked nauseous. Harlan just stared at the table. "Ms. Forrester sent text messages to her sister the morning of the incident prior to calling 911. There's a sketchy guy in here with a little white girl. Looks totally unnatural. I'm not letting this happen in my restaurant. She didn't call the police out of concern for a child. She called the police because she didn't like the racial makeup of a family in her dining room. She weaponized your police department, Officer Harlan, and you were all too happy to be the weapon. Marcus Caldwell finally spoke, his deep voice commanding absolute silence. Officer Harlan, when you put on that badge, you swore an oath to the Constitution, not to your biases, not to the irrational fears of ignorant citizens. You failed the public, you failed my daughter, and you failed the law. Harlan broke. He put his head in his hands, tears of utter defeat welling in his eyes. He knew in that exact moment that his life as he knew it was entirely over. The city of Oak Creek never allowed the case to reach the inside of a courtroom. The prospect of a jury trial was nothing short of apocalyptic for the municipality. The city's risk management attorneys, led by a perpetually sweating Harrison Cobb, took one look at Isaiah Dobbs's mountain of evidence, the crystal clear body camera footage, and the undeniable reality that the plaintiff was one of the most respected and powerful jurists in the state. They immediately advised the mayor and the city council to surrender unconditionally. To put the Honorable Judge Marcus Caldwell on the witness stand, accompanied by his traumatized, legally adopted 7-year-old daughter, weeping as she recounted her father being physically assaulted by an armed agent of the state, would have resulted in a jury verdict that could have bankrupted the entire municipality. It was a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, a nuclear bomb waiting to detonate over the town's reputation. Months after the disastrous deposition, a private mediation was scheduled. It took place not in the comfortable, familiar halls of the Oak Creek Municipal Building, but on the neutral, sterile floor of a downtown Chicago arbitration firm. The city sent its heavy hitters: Mayor Richard Gable, Chief Warren Maddox, and a team of frantic insurance adjusters. Marcus Caldwell sat at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit. He looked less like a man seeking a payout and more like a king holding court over a group of treasonous subjects. Beside him, Isaiah Dobbs was a shark smelling blood in the water. "Gentlemen," Dobbs began, tossing a thick-bound document onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "This is our final offer. We are not here to negotiate the financial figure. We are here to dictate the terms of your surrender." Mayor Gable, a politician who usually relied on a folksy charm that was entirely useless in this room, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Dobbs, Judge Caldwell, the city is prepared to offer a substantial sum to make this right. We want to avoid a protracted legal battle just as much as you do." "You misunderstand, Richard." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice a low, resonant rumble that demanded absolute silence. "You cannot make this right. You cannot untraumatize my daughter. You cannot erase the memory of a steel cuff biting into my wrist while a rookie officer threatened to throw my child into the foster care system because of the color of my skin. What you are going to do today is pay for the privilege of avoiding federal court." Dobbs opened the binder. "The financial settlement is $1.1 million, payable within days, not a penny less. But the money is the easy part. It's the stipulations attached to this settlement that you need to read carefully." Cobb scanned the document, his face draining of whatever color it had left. Dobbs continued unrelentingly. "Stipulation 1. Officer Derek Harlan will not be permitted to quietly resign. He will be formally terminated for gross misconduct. Furthermore, the city will not contest our petition to the state's Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission to have him permanently decertified." Chief Maddox bristled, his face flushing red. "You're asking me to end a young man's career permanently, to strip his credentials." "He ended his own career the moment he bypassed the Constitution to act as an armed enforcer for a racist diner manager," Marcus stated coldly, locking eyes with the chief. "He lacks the temperament, the intelligence, and the basic human decency required to wear a badge. If you do not agree to terminate him today, I will personally ensure he is named individually in a federal civil rights lawsuit that will garnish his wages for the rest of his natural life." The mayor quickly placed a hand on Maddox's arm, silencing him. "We agree to the termination." Stipulation 2, Dobbs continued. The Oak Creek Police Department will submit to a multi-year independent audit of its training practices. Every officer will undergo mandatory intensive retraining on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and strict adherence to Fourth Amendment protections, funded entirely by the city's budget. And Chief Maddox, Dobbs paused, allowing a tight, predatory smile to touch his lips, will announce his immediate retirement, effective at the end of this month. Now, wait just a damn minute, Maddox exploded, standing up from his leather chair. I wasn't even there. You can't force me out of my own department. Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You built the culture, Warren. You trained the officer. You allowed an environment to foster where a rookie felt completely comfortable violating a citizen's fundamental rights in broad daylight. You are the captain of a rotting ship. You will retire, or I will make sure your complete failure of leadership is the centerpiece of a multi-week trial broadcast on every news station in the Midwest. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Mayor Gable looked at the insurance adjusters, who offered grim, synchronized nods. They had no leverage. They had no defense. They were entirely at the mercy of a man who understood the law better than anyone else in the room. We accept, Mayor Gable whispered, looking down at his hands. The settlement was signed. The $1.1 million was transferred, but the hard karma that followed the ink drying on that contract was biblical in its precision. Officer Derek Harlan was called into internal affairs the very next morning. He had spent the last months on paid administrative leave, foolishly hoping the union would protect him, believing the whole thing would blow over as a minor misunderstanding. When he walked into the sterile room and saw his union representative looking at the floor, he knew it was over. He was stripped of his badge and his firearm on the spot. Months later, the state post board reviewed the body camera footage and the settlement details. They officially decertified him. The swaggering rookie who thought he owned the streets was permanently banned from ever working in law enforcement again. Stripped of his identity and his perceived power, Harlan's life spiraled. His police buddies, eager to distance themselves from a toxic PR disaster, stopped returning his calls. Last anyone heard, he was working the graveyard shift as an unarmed security guard at a strip mall 2 counties over, a ghost of his former arrogant self. Chief Warren Maddox fared no better. His immediate retirement was anything but dignified. There was no parade, no golden watch, no respectful speeches at a banquet. He cleaned out his office on an evening after most of the staff had gone home, slipping out the back door of the precinct to avoid the local news vans parked out front. The department he left behind was subjected to grueling, humiliating oversight, forced to rebuild its entire operational structure from the ground up under the watchful, unforgiving eye of independent federal auditors. But karma saved its absolute sharpest, most relentless bite for Lena Forrester, the woman whose prejudiced phone call had set the entire nightmare into motion. The terms of the settlement were technically confidential regarding the internal city politics, but the body camera footage and the 911 dispatch audio were a matter of public record. Weeks after the settlement, an anonymous source, likely a disgruntled city hall clerk tired of the corruption, leaked the entire multimedia file along with Lena's damning text messages to a major regional news network. The public backlash was instantaneous, explosive, and completely merciless. Lena became the ultimate viral face of suburban bigotry. Her voice whispering frantically about a sketchy guy and they don't look right was played on a loop on morning talk shows and evening news broadcasts. Protesters outraged by the blatant racism descended upon the Silver Spoon Diner. They lined the sidewalks with signs, chanting and blocking the entrance. The diner's corporate office in New York went into a state of absolute panic. Terrified of a nationwide boycott and plunging stock prices, they dispatched a team of regional executives to Oak Creek immediately. They didn't even wait for Lena to arrive for her morning shift. They met her in the parking lot. Lena, who had worked there for years and believed she was the undisputed, untouchable gatekeeper of the community, was fired on the asphalt. She wept, pleading that she was just trying to be a concerned citizen, but the corporate suits handed her a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement, ordering her to never set foot on the property again. But losing her job was only the beginning of her exile. Lena became a social pariah in the town she loved. She couldn't go to the local grocery store without people pointing and whispering. Waitresses at other restaurants refused to serve her. Her face was immortalized in thousands of angry social media posts. The isolation became so severe, so entirely suffocating, that months later she was forced to put her house on the market. She sold it at a significant loss, just to escape the relentless glare of her own consequences, moving out of the state entirely and disappearing into a disgraced obscurity. While the antagonists of the story were systematically dismantled by the consequences of their own actions, Marcus and Brielle began the slow, delicate process of healing. The money from the settlement sat in a trust, completely untouched for months. Marcus's sole focus was his daughter. Brielle had suffered severe night terrors in the weeks following the diner incident. The sight of a police cruiser passing by their house would send her into a panic attack, her small hands gripping Marcus's shirt as she relived the terror of seeing him in chains. Marcus immediately stepped back from his heavier caseload, dedicating his evenings to being fully present. He enrolled Brielle in specialized child play therapy, ensuring she had the professional, gentle support needed to process the trauma. Slowly, methodically, they rebuilt her sense of safety. They read books together, they painted, and they talked openly about what had happened, framing the narrative not around fear, but around the power of standing up for what is right. A year and a half after that fateful Sunday morning, the shadows had finally begun to recede from Brielle's bright blue eyes. Her laughter returned, filling the walls of their home once again. It was then that Marcus decided exactly what to do with the $1.1 million. He didn't buy a new house or a sports car or invest it in a hedge fund. He took the majority of the settlement after paying Isaiah Dobbs his well-earned substantial retainer and purchased a modest brick building in the heart of the city's underserved district. On a crisp, beautiful spring morning, a crowd gathered outside the newly renovated building. Marcus stood on the front steps, holding Brielle's hand. She was 8 years old now, wearing a bright yellow dress, her pigtails bouncing as she looked at the crowd with a genuine, brilliant smile. Above the door, a polished brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight. It read, "The Brielle Foundation for Equal Justice." Marcus had established a fully funded nonprofit legal clinic dedicated entirely to providing elite pro bono representation for families navigating the foster care and adoption systems. The foundation's primary mission was to protect multiracial families and marginalized parents from systemic discrimination, illegal separations, and civil rights violations. He had hired 3 of the sharpest young civil rights attorneys in the state to run it full-time. "All right, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, his heart swelling with a profound, overwhelming pride as he looked down at his daughter. "Are you ready to cut the ribbon?" "I'm ready, Dad," Brielle beamed, taking the oversized ceremonial scissors in her small hands. Marcus knelt down beside her, helping her guide the blades. As the red silk ribbon fell away and the crowd erupted into applause, Marcus looked at the brass plaque bearing his daughter's name. He had taken the darkest, most humiliating and terrifying moment of his life, a moment specifically designed to tear his family apart through ignorance and fear, and he had forged it into a permanent, unbreakable shield for thousands of others. The system had tried to break them. Instead, Marcus Caldwell broke the system, rewrote the rules, and ensured that the price of bigotry in his city was finally permanently too high to pay. The $1.1 million settlement wasn't just a payout. It was a profound testament to what happens when systemic arrogance collides with an immovable pillar of the law. Judge Marcus Caldwell didn't just win a lawsuit, he forced an entire city to look its prejudice in the eye and pay the ultimate price for it. Officer Harlan lost his badge, Lena lost her livelihood, and a corrupt system was fundamentally reformed, proving that nobody, absolutely nobody, is above the law. It's a chilling reminder that true justice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a tweed jacket and demands to be treated with dignity. If this story of absolute karma and legal brilliance made your blood boil and cheer for the right side, don't let the conversation stop here. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends to expose everyday injustice, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-to-life stories where the bad guys finally get what they deserve.